Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Christina Fox, the CEO of Tech Alliance of Southwestern Ontario, a place for dreamers, innovators, and world-changing ideas. We are committed to innovative companies who are launching, scaling, and competing globally through our advisory services, our accelerator, and experiences like these with partners and participants like all of you. Again, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, though, let me share with you a few key points. Everyone is muted on the call today, and if you have any questions, please do submit them through the Zoom Q&A button below, featured at the bottom of your screen, and we'll certainly attempt to answer all the questions that we have towards the end of the presentation today, and you'll have contact information from our speakers today in case you'd like to do some individual follow-up. This webinar will be recorded and available after the call, and you'll receive that following the call later on this afternoon. So we've seen major shifts in the way businesses operate, from creating new collaborations, manufacturing emergency healthcare products, and certainly developing new innovative solutions. These initiatives really demonstrate just how resilient we are as a community across Ontario to come together in overcoming COVID-19. The Ontario Together Fund helps us to achieve just that. So we're going to explore that today. And to that end, we're very pleased to host the Ontario Together Fund Stimulus for Emergency and Innovative Solutions in partnership with our friends Monica Braz at Better Business Bureau, Barry Fitzgerald of the St. Thomas and District Chamber of Commerce, and Kim Whitehead of the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, and of course, our colleagues across Southwestern Ontario. On top of that, we're really proud to host our valued partner and the team from the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and our keynote speaker, Steve Karpenko. Stephen is a senior business advisor with over 15 years experience working with small and medium businesses, particularly focused on operations and managing through challenging financial times. Stephen excels at providing practical advice, focus for businesses, and Ontario government programs that are being launched. So we are really pleased and so delighted to have Steve with us on the call today. And so Steve, that's your cue. Now over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina, and it's wonderful to be here and talking about this fund, the Ontario Together Fund, and let's spend a half hour or 45 minutes just together and think about the impact that we can have and the positive difference that's possible, because we're all, I know it's an overused expression, but we're all in this together, and it certainly is a challenging time and needs everyone's input and the collaboration to make happen, and that's really the spirit underneath the Ontario Together Fund, is to bring the community together and see where we can innovate and have that impact and make a difference. So thank you very much for having me and for having us.
You bet.
Thank you. So just as an overview of the Ontario Together Fund, we started this just at the beginning of April. It's a $50 million fund that was initially designed to provide immediate funding around personal protective equipment and kind of the immediate needs sort of in that crisis phase, as it was initially the frontline healthcare workers who needed the gloves and masks and face shields and all the other things. And of course, as we all know, that has now gone, our definition of frontline worker includes every grocery store employee and anyone who we're coming in contact with in that sector. So the need for PPE is expanding, and we all follow the stories about where the supply chain shortages are and the challenges of procuring stuff internationally and how that's having an impact. So this fund also is really the gestation of that supply chain security around PPE, and that was the initial starting point back on April 1st. And really funding available to Ontario companies with a variety of different eligible projects. So even within that PPE space, there was manufacturing, there would have been warehousing and people who held inventory of PPE that could make a contribution. And that, of course, expanded more into innovation. And we've seen things like provision of healthcare over virtual channels, so well beyond Zoom and the applications I've dealt with coming from all kinds of directions. But really, at the end of the day, it's connecting the healthcare provider, whether it's related to mental health or counseling or dealing with frontline workers and kind of the trauma that some people experience to different degrees, and kind of putting the technology and the healthcare provider together as a solution that's something we've seen in the Ontario Together Fund. And now, as we go forward, expanding the boundaries to include things like volunteerism and e-commerce solutions, which I'll get into a little bit more. Right at the bottom there, the first step is submitting to the Ontario Together portal. There's the web address there, or just Googling Ontario Together and you'll be taken there. And that's the first step in the application process. And I'll go into that as well. So you can see the agenda for today, go into some program details and how applications are assessed and what the scope and boundaries are. So in conjunction with the Ontario Together Fund, we also created this portal, and the purpose of the portal is to make it easy for companies to kind of identify themselves in terms of the projects and in terms of ways that they would want to make a difference or a contribution. And we've seen, so I talked about the supplies and the different mental health services, but we've also seen things like financial service providers saying, hey, normally I charge X dollars per hour for helping companies manage their cash flow, and I'll reduce my hourly rate by 50% in order to help out. And so that's kind of the spirit, and it's gone, for example, in manufacturing, not just traditional manufacturing, but integrating technology providers like 3D printing operations to produce swabs and face shields. And so really considering all kinds of different avenues in terms of helping meet the challenge, and those different supply chain elements, those kind of like those major things, manufacturing, PPE, e-commerce, they all break down into different subcategories of solution. And so we're seeing proposals where companies are basically putting their best foot forward and saying, this is something we can do. Here's our project definition. And sometimes it involves funding. Other times we have a channel that's kind of direct to procurement, where if you're a company who has a PPE solution that is kind of ready to go, ready to ship, that we can move that right into kind of a government health services procurement channel where they would be able to issue a purchase order and allow that PPE to be purchased and brought into the supply chain. So here's a definition of the 3 different streams, just to give you an idea of how it breaks down. So the first thing is emergency supplies, and you can see the list there. And that's the procurement stream. So companies who, as I just said, who have something to offer to the PPE supply channel, kind of bypass the assessment process and, of most of the other applications and really go into the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services and Ontario Health, who handle those 2 ministries, who are working in partnership with us, handle procurement on behalf of their ministry and on behalf of their partners in order to make acquisitions of PPE and get it into their hands. So that's stream 1. Stream 2 and 3, the distinction there, they're both about innovation, but the distinction there are kind of stream 2 with innovative solutions is more along the lines of the healthcare professionals who are using virtual channels to deliver services that may have been presented or delivered in person in the past, and things like business services, accounting, cash flow management, and various other things that you could, and it covers a wide range, and they would be the innovative solutions. And then kind of the last stream is more of a catch-all for innovative ideas, things that we haven't really thought of. For example, yesterday I saw a proposal that was proposing to use gaming technology to help in education. So helping with homeschooling and that, but using a gamification platform, and that would have fallen into stream 3. So it's really, proposals are evaluated and kind of moved up based on whether they meet an immediate need would kind of be the highest priority. But then we're looking to have projects that can be brought to market fairly quickly. But the ones I think that have the big impact are the ones that not only meet today's needs, but are kind of setting us up for what tomorrow's needs are. Because I think everyone would agree that we're not going to go back to what we had before, that no matter what, there's some change that's permanent, that's part of virtually everything we do. And so a lot of these proposals not only have the addressing of the current need as we move from crisis to reopening to growth, but they also have kind of roots in terms of that longer term new normal, if you want to call it that, where we're going in terms of our supply chains. So in terms of details, as I mentioned, $50 million fund. We're just at the beginning right now in terms of offering the fund out. So there's probably been around a half dozen proposals that have been accepted now and funded. But that's only a fraction of the overall $50 million fund. So new applications are encouraged. So even though we started this almost 2 months ago, definitely we're still like full on in terms of considering applications and putting them through the assessment streams and the assessment process. So just jumping down to eligibility, Ontario-based companies are obviously, this is, we're Ontario, and that's what the fund is for, and it's taxpayer dollars, so servicing the Ontario economy is a big part of it. Although the companies can be headquartered in Ontario and have more of a global footprint, we've seen that, and we've seen some actually very large companies come in who have the ability to offer some pretty serious like supply chain consulting services, and they would have they're of a global nature, but they're focusing in on kind of the Ontario aspect. So minimum of 2 years of operation supported by 2 years of financial statements. I've had questions, does that include things like sole proprietors who are just starting up? And I would say that's kind of where a line of distinction is, that the 2 years of financial statements probably vetted through an accountant, like the review engagement type status is something that really, to me, that's the starting point versus a sole proprietor, a startup, which really has no track record and doesn't have the ability to kind of show the history. I think to me that's a major distinction. Communities may be eligible if they provide technical advice or innovation broadly in Ontario, and we've seen a lot of community partnerships with things like childcare, primarily family care, family advisory, where it's a not-for-profit or it's even charitable, and a clustering of different organizations coming together that are saying, hey, we've been doing this in our community locally, but now we'd like to, and we're ready to expand across Ontario and provide that service. So that's something that we've seen a fair bit of. And the last criteria there to make sure, I guess, that your taxes are paid up and that there's no action against the company, important criteria. So I've talked a lot about eligible projects. You can read along as I go here. Like I said, we started with the high impact emergency needs, and now we're shifting a little bit. We've more recently included e-commerce initiatives and volunteerism. So some organizations or independent advisors might just want to make a contribution on a volunteer basis and just kind of almost jump to the front of the queue if possible, because they're ready to go. They kind of meet all the general qualifications and want to have an impact. And so we've opened up to that, as well as e-commerce, and that has all kinds of implications when you think of going from there's business to business e-commerce where manufacturers and kind of intermediate buyers are involved, and then there's the business to consumer side where you're going from the warehouse to into the consumer's hands, and that may have a retailer who's responsible for the endpoint distribution, curbside pickup. There's all sorts of implications in terms of innovation and technology that might come into play with e-commerce type solutions, and other ideas. And so if something that I haven't, I mean, there's just so many things that I can't even imagine, and then I see them on an application. I go, hey, you know what? That's pretty innovative, and well, let's look at this a little bit closer. So anyway, the last point is regarding the start date and completion date. You can see that it's kind of in that 1 year time frame. The sooner things can get up and running, the better, i.e. in the next month, say 6-week time frame, and then have the impact that's intended in the project proposal within a year's time. So that's the sweet spot for the fund. So in terms of types of support, conditional grants, meaning that it's a grant, it's not a loan, but it covers up to 75% of eligible project costs. So the company or organization that's putting a proposal forward would pay the other 25%. up to a maximum of $2.5 million, which is pretty significant. But on average, we would expect that the awards of the grants would be smaller, but it's really not constrained. I mean, if a project is bigger because it has a kind of a border-to-border scope and is fairly in-depth, and I've certainly dealt with them just in my own portfolio, then $2.5 million may be where it's at. Stacking with other government funding sources is allowed, and that's not always the case. For those of you who've dealt with the Southwestern Ontario Development Fund, there are definitely restrictions on stacking. But in this case, one of the benefits of loosening that restriction is that there are things like the Canada Jobs Grant that's out there. There's summer employment, student employment that can be brought in through federal programs that would be probably a real important part in terms of delivering this type of solution on kind of a short timeline. To be able to bring in those other resources is really a strength and to be encouraged. There are innovation companies who are tapped into the National Research Council through IRAP, and that would be somewhere where part of the funding might come from IRAP to stimulate some aspect of innovation, coupled with other funding, maybe through OTF, to bring that solution to the marketplace. And so stacking with other sources is encouraged. And other complementary support, so that bottom part, so we're in partnership with MGCS and the Ministry of Health. We're the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. There's a lot of other stuff that we do that anyone who's dealt with us knows about. And so the OTF could also be a wedge into accessing other services, or within a proposal to say, if we could have this from another ministry, that maybe that would make our project more feasible, that would be something that would also be considered. So in terms of eligible project costs, it covers a wide range, pretty much anything you could imagine about getting up and running, whether it's on the services side, some advisory input that you may need yourselves, or raw materials, equipment, tuning, that kind of thing would be considered eligible project costs. The key is to be very specific within the application about how these costs will be allocated. And in my experience, the stronger applications are ones that actually kind of have that line-by-line detail, and the application framework allows for not only the line items, but also the time frame when that part of the expenditure would come into play. So the stronger applications almost look like have kind of a cash flow forecast type of feel to them. And so there's a lot of project costs that are eligible, and the more detail that can be provided, the easier it is to evaluate the application. And I've been part of a number of them where the detail just isn't there. And so the intent of the proposal or the scope of the project is clear and appears beneficial, but then when it gets into the details, there's nothing connecting the ability of the company or organization to deliver on what seems to be a fairly feasible or much needed project. So it's really important in that application process to kind of sharpen the pencil and make sure that you flesh out those details and get other people's input maybe on your application to say, hey, do you think I've got everything? Is it clear, etc. So there's the application form. You can see the criteria on the left. So the company and experience, and it's not just a company, and this question's come up before. What about partnerships or consortiums or organizations? I gave the example earlier about the community consortium. I've seen those. Also applications where companies say, this is what we do as our primary, but we've done it in person normally, but now we're shifting to a virtual model, and here are the technology partners that we have access to, and here's how they're helping us and helping us pivot from being an in-person service delivery to being a virtual. And so those are typically identified in the proposal. So the company and experience is not just from your website, copy and paste, here's what we do. It's more in context of here's how it applies, what we've been doing, gives us the experience and background to provide the solution we're proposing within the context of kind of the COVID-19 crisis and then beyond. And so the project and solution details, I've talked about that. costing. So that's not just where the funds would be applied if you were applying for OTF funding, but there are other sources of funding. So what other government grants have you had? Do you have any experience with dealing with government funding in the past? And are you stacking any other government grants or private sources of funding with the application? That all gets flushed out. And then, of course, the delivery team, and anyone who's an entrepreneur knows the importance of delivery team in terms of being able to follow through and bring the value that's claimed in the application. So that's basically the content of the application. And then the assessment framework is kind of multi-staged, where the simple entry point is through the portal, the Ontario Together Fund portal. Some basic questions are asked around those previous criteria that I just showed you. And and that's vetted, and if it passes that, then there's an invitation to present a more detailed business case, and more or less the same criteria, just in more detail, more questions, more things are asked, providing the financial statements and different attachments. So the second stage, the business case assessment is more detailed, and then that's further assessed by a team. And then ultimately, it goes into the funds administration group, and ultimately the decisions are made at the minister level. So the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade it makes the final funding decision. So it's a multi-step framework, but it's also on a fast track, and there's a lot of people involved in assessing these applications, literally dozens, and we've had a huge number, like 20,000 applications to the Ontario Together Fund. So there's a lot coming in at the top and a lot of people working on them. And our commitment is within 4 to 6 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks to go from receipt of application to funding decision. And then at the bottom there, you can see that the approved applicants will be required to enter into certain agreements in terms of confidentiality and usual things you'd expect in terms of being a recipient of taxpayer funds and the kind of obligations that come with that and, as part of the project. So that's it in terms of the Ontario Together Fund. It's a great opportunity for everyone to get in and not just kind of get in on the ground floor and make a difference immediately, but also to help with this securing of our PPE independence and supply chain, as well as to really help shift the whole, as we go into reopening, to give everyone a platform for maybe their own supply chain management issues, and getting everything kind of up and running, and let this new economy, however it's going to be defined, let it emerge as a result of not only us all being together in terms of our health and wellness and protecting our safety from that standpoint, but also our economic health and wellness and getting that back up and running so that we can all kind of get back to the lives that we've come to enjoy. So anyway, that's my presentation. I guess we'll be open for some Q&A. I'm sure there's lots of questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That's really terrific. What I do love about the Ontario Together Fund is that we truly are in this together, and we do see ourselves certainly as a pipeline for the Ontario Together Fund, with the brilliant pivots that are happening with innovative founders across Southwestern Ontario. So, you know, for those who are looking to sustain their business and see this as an opportunity to support reentry and rebuilding the economy, as well as people who have maybe a reduced market demand for the innovation that they have brought to market, and they're seeing an opportunity with funds like this to support additional movement within the province so that we can have a better future and greater economic prosperity. What I do love also is that you've covered eligibility of the projects. There are a number of questions in the Q&A, and we'll certainly get to them. I appreciate that you highlight the streams of emergency supplies, innovative solutions, and innovative ideas, ranging from PPE products and services to technology-driven products and digital solutions for safe reopening, as well as ideas or research organizations that can help support Ontarians as they move towards a safer experience. I also really like that you highlighted the volunteerism in e-commerce, and I know
Mhm.
certainly from watching some of the Ontario Fund portal that different opportunities are posted there more regularly. And I think if there's one thing that we can impress upon those that are on the call is that it's important to go back to the portal pretty frequently, because as things evolve, there may be different opportunities for different solutions. So I really like what you highlighted so far today. So I'm going to get us started then with some of the Q&A. For those of you who have placed a question in the chat, we would love for you to put that over into the Q&A section. And that way myself and Stephen can manage the questions that have come in and make sure we get to as many as we can. There are some questions that have come in that might actually have already been answered, Steve, by you, but I think it might be worth repeating if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we'll kick it off. What is the deadline or cutoff date for which applications must be submitted by?
Yeah, that's a good question. And things with the OTF, it's a bit of a moving target in the sense that I think that when applications come in, they're assessed based on how quickly can the solution be up and running, i.e., I think I mentioned 6 weeks, and that's kind of what I've seen, where if somebody's applying today, so here we are, May 26th, to say they're up and running by mid-June or maybe at the latest end of June, that would be kind of looked upon favorably. But in terms of when does, I don't think there's a set time frame. I think I had earlier in the slides that the fund itself would kind of be open till March of next year in terms of the fund flow, but in terms of like an application cutoff or closing the door, I'm not aware of a date on that. But I would say, based on those 20,000 applications coming in, that the sooner you can get it in, the better for sure.
Yeah, I mean, 20,000 applications is a lot of applications. And at some point, one of the questions that we get asked is, how do we know when the money's going to run out? And we say, if you've got a great idea and you're in the process of validation and discovery, put it in, and there will be some guidance that's supportive of that. So great answer. Thank you for being so honest about what that could feel like for people who are thinking about innovation and solutions right now. I did hear some commentary about the opportunity for partnership. So the question is, can you submit a partnership between 2 organizations or multiple companies coming together as a project? So maybe just review that detail. I do recall that being on one of your slides, but it'd be good to go through that again.
Yeah, so there have been multiple proposals that have come in where there's a lead entity, and typically you see, maybe it's more, you'd see kind of on the social services side of it, where, like I said, they're pivoting from kind of in-person. Like I can't imagine, say, a year ago, somebody who's really in need doing things through a Zoom or an online platform, and now that's all we have right now. So they're very quickly needing to pivot from in-person to virtual, and so you see those partnerships coming in where they've identified the kind of the technology partner. But in terms of the application, there's a lead company certainly that's identified that meets that criteria of 2 years of financial statements and operational history. But to me, it's a stronger application when things are transparent and fully disclosed versus, especially when you think of an innovation company where maybe the runway before was, we're just in alpha testing or beta, and we still have a year and a half to go before we were going to, and we're funded maybe, but we're still a ways off in terms of our own self-sufficiency. But maybe now, given the way things are, you can identify a partner that you say, hey, I'll give this to you, or I'll lend this to, and cut a deal on your own as far as how that relationship will work. But in terms of the project application, that those partnerships are identified, they're transparent, but that it typically would strengthen the application anyway. So it would be encouraged, yeah.
Okay, and maybe a follow-on question to that is, can any one company submit more than one application? And I'm guessing, it's because they have 2 solutions that they're capable of delivering on. Are there any limitations related to that?
It's hard for me to say yes or no on that, but I can say that in the procurement stream, for sure, there have been companies that have been have submitted multiple things that have led to more than one purchase order.
Okay.
And so the answer would be, I would say, start with one, your best, and then once you're part of that conversation, to ask the question or put forward whether another proposal would be appropriate.
Okay. So then you had talked about some eligibility costs. Are there any restrictions based on, percentage allocation across the expenses? For example, a percentage against labor versus a percentage against equipment, or is that on a per applicant procedure that you would identify or assess that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I mean, if it was a banker who is assessing the application for a loan, they'd be looking for capital assets and collateral and all that kind of stuff. So, but the answer is no. These aren't working capital loans or anything like that. They're grants, and labor is often a big part of the application funding, especially in the service side.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a tough question about stacking, because it's a question that we often get, and I'm sure my friends at St. Thomas Chamber and Woodstock Chamber and Better Business Bureau get as well. So what if a company has already applied for or received other government relief funds through other programs? Can you clarify what you mean by eligibility of stacking with other government funding sources? And if you're able to, Stephen, are you able to talk about, based on, you've applied for it and maybe have not heard, or that you have applied for it and received it? Are there declarations that happen within the application process that help you to assess that?
Yes. So so there's actually a question on the business case, which is like the second level of assessment. There's actually a question like, have you ever received any government funding? And to be specific about that. And then within the project, what are the sources of funds? So it's not just your OTF component, but also other government programs and private funding. So your own, you see cases where companies are kind of 50% funding out of their own sources. And so all of those different line items are identified. And at my level of assessment that I've been involved with, there's no kind of discrimination one way or another against an application because of its sources of funding. But obviously they're legitimate, illegitimate stuff wouldn't be considered. But there's no guidelines or anything to say, oh, they can't be considered because of they have more than one source of funding. The key is to be transparent and to complete the thing fully, because if it doesn't come out at that stage, it'll come out in the back end after people have been involved and spent time both on the applicant side and on the review side, and we don't want to waste any resources if we can help it.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. There's no time to waste for people who are creating innovative solutions, and application processes can be time consumption. And so I love the fact that you've given as much detail today already on the call, and the detail in the answers to some of the questions, because I think it really helps people to decide how they'll move forward, particularly even within which stream. So I've two questions. One is a bit of a follow-on to the first. So I'll start with the first question. Are innovative solutions by early seed stage startup eligible for the Ontario Together Fund under the Innovative Solutions or Innovative Ideas category, or perhaps both?
Probably, if at all, the innovative ideas category, because there's in the solution side, there's a lot of established vendors. As we know, it's almost hard to have an original idea these days that isn't already in the marketplace. So if it's probably the earlier on would be in the ideas stage, but just in fairness, I think that the applications, they need to kind of show like an end-to-end or fully conceived market readiness, if you will, and maybe that's more where the partnerships come into play, where behind the scenes a Tech Alliance member is maybe working with another member and providing or supporting from a technology standpoint something, versus applying on their own and saying, hey, I have a new e-commerce shopping cart, but then that requires integration on one or many levels in order to actually be fully functional within kind of more of a turnkey type of solution. So the more of the seed startup, I think would require a fair amount of like mentorship kind of outside of the OTF application in terms of is this really ready, or just something that maybe we got to take a pass at this time, and gear ourselves towards a more maturing new supply chain model, say a year and a half or 2 years from now.
So for example, if somebody were to submit under the innovative ideas stream instead of the innovative solutions stream, and that comes through to the team that are monitoring the OTF, if you identified that there's an innovation that could maybe be in a different stream, could an applicant expect some reach out to say, hey, you've put it into ideas, but it really belongs in innovative solutions, or the reverse? Is there any stewardship on that side?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So
Okay.
that dialogue mechanism is in place where something that's kind of borderline, like, you know, this sounds good, but we're missing detail in the application. Can someone please follow up with the organization to find out X? And it's kind of a specific question, but the answer is yes, that's part of the assessment process, because the assessors don't necessarily come from the background to fully you know, evaluate it, but they say, hey, everything else sounds really good. We're just missing a little information, and so there's a back channel for that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then certainly if there is some outreach, then that's really helpful to know, that people know it's not just sort of put in and they may not hear. In the meantime, if somebody has a question related to the preparation of their proposal or their application, do you recommend that they reach out for consultation? You know, bearing in mind that you've had 20,000 applications, is there somebody that they should or could reach out to further assess or to qualify?
Well, I would say like the number one priority, of course, is assessing those 20,000 and making sure that the right action is being taken place. But my colleagues, Rafael Vargas, who is kind of connected or partnered with Tech Alliance, could work with you and with the organization that maybe we can come up with a process where if there is some sort of mentorship or that kind of questioning, that we deal with it efficiently and kind of point to point versus just having all the companies trying to find out on their own, because chances are there's overlap in terms of questions, and then you build your own expertise in terms of answering those things and vetting them up front.
That sounds good. I mean, I know that we certainly have a number of client companies on this call, and we made the recommendation for them to come on the call knowing that you were going to be so open with the details. And of course, there's a number of questions in the Q&A of, will the presentation be available after this call? Will the recording be available? For those of you who are asking, yes, indeed, we will. I think the level of detail that Stephen has prepared and Raphael have prepared for this call really demonstrates their willingness to share as much information as they can, particularly considering the volume that we've seen already through OTF. And for those of you who work with us directly, you know, this is an opportunity for us to certainly pipeline back into Raphael and to Stephen, so that you can have some of that assessment done, and that we can support you in that assessment or give you a bit of pointers based on the information that we also have. There's another question related to intellectual property. So it's more of a statement of thoughts on intellectual property. Does being approved for this funding create an expectation that the province of Ontario be granted a license to or ownership of the relevant IP? Are you able to answer that question?
I mean, I know what my expectation would be on the other side of it. If I was applying, I would expect that that the relationship is kind of a buyer-seller type of thing, and that there wouldn't be a transference of intellectual property. But I can't say for sure, because I've not been privy to those like final legal agreements. But that's a good question for us to follow up with you, Christina. Like, leave that with us, Raphael, and I'll get into that and get back to you.
Okay. Based on some of the streams that have been posted and some of the innovative solutions and innovative ideas that have been sort of requested through proposal, is there any, do you know if there's anything coming down the pipe related to tourism-focused ideas to help support local tourism using technology, innovation, and how innovation could support that? Or would you say that this is still a little bit more focused on manufacturing and digital experiences?
That's a great question. I wouldn't be surprised, maybe if tourism, because it is such a part of Ontario's economy, just like e-commerce and volunteerism, that if something should open up, I'm not privy to those policy decisions, but it wouldn't surprise me. But at the same time, I saw a proposal yesterday in the Stream 3, the Innovative Ideas, that was exactly that, and it was a company that was using gaming and virtual technology to provide city experiences so that people could actually feel like they were having a vacation in these, I think there were like 19 or 20 different locations that I identified where you could actually go and just as if you're like on the riding bus in Toronto, that you could actually virtually tour these different destinations from your computer. So that we've already seen that, and
That's cool.
yeah.
And I think of, if there's some opportunity for tourism as it relates to London, it's really coining a staycation in a different way. So if there was an opportunity for me to tour my own city and have a deeper dive into culture and history and create a tourism experience there, I think I would sign up for that. So I'm really glad that that question came in as we look to reentry and safe reopening of our economy and experiences within our own communities and supporting sort of the shop local and the local experiences. There's a couple of other questions. I'm just doing a time check at 1:44. I do believe that we have a bit more time with you if we can. But I know for many people, when they registered for a 45-minute time block. So Stephen, are you okay to take maybe 2 more questions?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. And for those of you who do have to run, because perhaps you're in back-to-back calls, another Zoom meeting or another connection with stakeholders, feel free to jump off the call and look for the recording in your email. So one of the other ones that I did like is sort of somebody who's already sort of iterating the process and taking their initial technology and perhaps improving the experience or improving its applicability. And so one of the questions says, if we've already developed an app and acquired a few clients, now we need more resources to improve the solution. Can we apply to the fund?
The answer is yes. If the solution is towards kind of that mission of COVID-19 relief, reopen, rebuild, yeah, I've seen that many times where it just, to me, that just translates into, hey, we have a smaller customer base that addresses the needs of what the fund is expressing, that with additional funding, we could reach a larger market. I've seen that many times. Yeah.
Okay, and then last question, and perhaps this is known by folks who've already been in the portal and have made an application, but I'm going to ask it anyhow because I think it's worthwhile. If somebody has already completed an application and they either have had an improvement or they've learned something really interesting today that they didn't otherwise know, is there a way for them to go in and either reapply with the same technology or innovation? Is there a way for them to adjust their application through the portal? Are you able to just give a bit more detail as people prepare to jump into the portal?
You know what, Christina, that is an excellent question that I don't have the answer for, and we'll follow up on that and get back to you.
Okay, that's terrific. So that's really putting you on the spot for the very last question. It's certainly an answer I didn't have because I haven't spent time in the portal, but clearly people who are in there or have learned, significantly from our dialogue today, that they're thinking, okay, now that I know this, perhaps I could have suggested this, or maybe it's not.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah, okay. That sounds good. So I think to that end, I know there are a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, but I think we covered for the most part the variety of questions, and I thank those participants for including those questions. And Stephen, both you and Raphael, thank you to you and the team at the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade for outlining this critical program and sharing your expertise today. Having that inside view, the amount of detail that you've shared, and being able to bring sort of a positive experience to this uncertainty that so many innovators are facing, and knowing that there's been a significant volume of applications, that for me is inspiring, knowing that there's that many innovators that see an opportunity to contribute and see an opportunity for economic prosperity. So I think that that's a really solid signal that we should celebrate. But truly the experience that you've delivered on today and the level of detail and your capability of answering the questions is truly outstanding. And I want to thank you for your time today.
Christina, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I also just need to thank our partners who are supportive in making sure that this session was shared with communities across Southwestern Ontario, including the Better Business Bureau, St. Thomas District, Chamber of Commerce, and certainly our Woodstock District Chamber of Commerce, and our team at Tech Alliance. Of course, we've been anxious to have this experience and hear more firsthand knowledge about the Ontario Together Fund and how optimistic we are about the good things that will come from our province for both a national and global scope. So that's it for us today, everybody. If you want to continue to have experiences like the one you've experienced today, go back to our website at techalliance.ca and sign yourself up for something else as it relates to where you are in your age and stage of your experience. And for everybody on the call, that's it for today. Thank you so much. Be well, be safe, and take good care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.